The captains of the Gotei 13 undergo significant changes throughout the story of Bleach. They are easily the most developed group, and when the story isn't focusing around Ichigo, we usually see what's going on through the lens of the captains of the Gotei 13. The Gotei 13 evolves multiple times throughout the series, with some captains defecting to enemy factions, some captains dying, and new captains replacing them, as well as existing captains growing more powerful than ever. This does make Gotei 13 the most dynamic organization within Bleach, and by the end of the series, after several changes and reshuffles, the Gotei 13 is almost unrecognizable compared to what we see at the start of the story. Not only has the membership changed, but the power levels of the existing captains have also evolved significantly. This highlights how each generation of the Gotei 13 captains has their own respective strongest members, but it begs the question, among all of the captains that have been revealed within Bleach, who exactly is the most strongest? In order to fully understand this, I want to examine the power levels of every single captain from all of the generations of the Gotei 13 and assess who is ranked the strongest to the weakest. Be sure to stick around until the very end of this video, as I'll even be talking about novel exclusive captains like Kenpachi Kurashiki and Soya Izashiro. So without further delay, here is my video ranking every single captain of the Gotei 13 from the weakest to the strongest. Discover the Undead Collection and be amongst the very first to join us on our journey over at Getsuga.com. As is the case with our ranking videos, I want to lay out a few ground rules for how the characters will be placed. Firstly, of this include Kenpachi Kiganjo and Ginrei Kuchiki. All characters will be evaluated at their very best and placed accordingly on this list. It's important to note that captains means every canon character who has ever held the title of captain of the Gotei 13. This does not include characters who are substitute captains, so individuals like Shuhei Hisagi or Izuru Kira will not be included because they weren't actually captains by qualification and were only briefly fulfilling the duties of a captain because their prior captains had defected. Now, with all of this clarified, let's begin the ranking, as we start with who I believe to be the most weakest captain that we've seen within Bleach so far. Isane Kotetsu is a character who I feel like was completely forgotten by Kubo. This is peculiar because despite her minimal presence within the story, she actually holds a very solid place within Bleach that might warrant a dedicated discussion of its own. However, outside of her well-developed relationships and her place within the story, Isane's character appears to be painfully hollow in other areas. This remains true when we examine her combat feats. Knowing that she becomes a captain at the end of the series does not reflect well on her capabilities. Aside from her presumed expertise in Kaido, given that she was the lieutenant of Squad 4, she has very little else going for her. In fact, it's quite amusing that the highlight of her combat role in the story was being knocked out by a barehanded Ichigo in the Soul Society arc. Her Zanpakuto Itegumo is a significant point of interest for me, as the name Itegumo translates to frozen cloud, as this might suggest that it would have ice abilities, which is interesting because it would make her the third ice user in the Gotei 13. I'm curious to see how Kubo plans to differentiate Isane's Zanpakuto from Rukia's and Hitsugaya's. Throughout the 1000-Year Blood War arc, she performs no substantial feats aside from her medical duties, and thanks to the anime, we did get to see a exclusive scene where Isane was treating patients. Unfortunately, she remains underwhelming throughout the final arc, and we learn nothing new about her powers, whether if her current captain role is due to a lack of a worthy replacement, or because she has in fact grown into a powerful Shinigami is yet to be determined. Considering the insane jumps in power that Bleach characters can make if given enough time, I wouldn't count her out just yet. It has been over 10 years since the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and in that time she may well have trained enough to have earned the role of captain, but we won't really know until we see more of her during the upcoming Hell arc of the Bleach manga. But as things stand now, with her full capabilities unknown and her powers critically underutilized, she must unfortunately take the position of the weakest captain of all time, at at least for now. Ranking just above Isane is Tetsuzaimon Iba, the second weakest captain of the Gotei 13. Like Isane, Iba is another newly appointed captain that we see during the epilogue of Bleach. When examining his powers and feats, there's not really much to go on, as he has no notable achievements during the 1000-year Blood War arc, but he does have some commendable character moments. If this were a ranking video of characters with the least amount of screen time, Iba would undoubtedly top the list. Throughout the story, he has several off-screen battles, and it's implied that he is fighting, training, and engaging in various activities, but we rarely see any of them in action. We might as well call him the implied man, because his entire existence as a fighter is suggested but never really shown. Even his newly appointed lieutenant during the New Breeds from Hell chapter, Rindo, could arguably have more impressive showings than Iba from what we've seen from him during the one-shot chapter. The most that we can infer about Iba's power level is that he is at least within the same ballpark as Soul Society arc Ikkaku. This is considering the fact that the two of them were shown to be sparring partners and are implied to be equals. While this is a better starting point than Isane's, it still falls short of the power level that is to be expected of a captain. Like Isane, Iba doesn't display any notable strategic prowess or intelligence, so these factors are not even a point of consideration here. His Zanpakuto abilities remain a complete mystery since we don't even know its name. If Iba is on the same level as Ikkaku, then we can assume that he has activated Bankai, and his appointment as captain during the epilogue of Bleach confirms that he is at least at the level of attaining Bankai. Given everything that we know about Iba, it's hard to really accept him as a suitable replacement for Captain Komamura. While Komamura was not a powerhouse himself, he was still significantly more powerful than what Iba was shown to be. So like Isane, Iba faces the same issue. His capabilities are largely unknown and are underwhelming to say the least. We can only hope that the upcoming Hell arc of the manga will showcase the full extent of both Isane and Iba's abilities and hopefully provide much needed, well-deserved power-ups which make them worthy of their positions as captains. Rounding out our bottom three captains, we have none other than Lisa Yadomaru, the newly appointed captain of Squad 8. Despite how fond I am of her character, I am really skeptical of her appointment as captain. She definitely does fare better than Isane and Iba, as Lisa has significantly more experience and combat prowess than they do, along with far better feats to her name. For instance, she demonstrated the ability to hold off a holified Berserk Ichigo for an hour, a feat that is far more impressive than anything that we've seen from Iba and Isane. However, this is both a good starting point and a poor ending point for Lisa's accomplishments. Beyond this, her noteworthy achievements are limited, as she briefly fights Haribel and dispatches a few fodder Menos, but these instances don't provide a comprehensive view of her capabilities. Her fight against Haribel wasn't a true one-on-one battle, as she had support from Hitsugaya and Hiyori, making it difficult to gauge her strength relative to Haribel. During the 1000-year Blood War arc, Lisa is unfortunately off-screen for a lot of the time, and she is mostly shown in non-combative roles alongside Hiyori under Urahara's direction. It definitely doesn't help Lisa's case when we learn that she, along with the other Vizards, were wiped out by Gerard. While she displays impressive skill in Zanjutsu, she doesn't seem to surpass the more skilled combatants within Bleach. She doesn't showcase any Kido or other significant Shinigami combat arts unless you counter kicks against Ichigo as a form of Hakuda. The biggest issue that I have with Lisa is a lack of significant showings. She could potentially be incredibly powerful, but without opportunities to demonstrate her abilities, we are left with nothing but speculation. Additionally, her Zanpakuto Haguru Tonbo is largely unexplored, and we don't even know its basic Shikai abilities, let alone the Bankai that it's implied to have, which again is a given now that she's been ranked as a captain. There's undoubtedly room for Lisa to grow and improve as the story continues, especially when you consider the fact that she was once Shunsui's vice captain and had likely learned a great deal from him. However, until we receive some more concrete information about her abilities and a stronger showing of her feats, Lisa's ranking will remain low in discussions like this. Coming in at the number 23 spot is Soifon. Now it pains me to place her this low, but despite her fantastic design, Kubo's intricate character work, and her well thought out abilities, she often proves to still be underwhelming in combat scenarios. Soifon is in fact the most experienced experienced captain that we've talked about thus far. Her prowess as an assassin and her deadly Zanpakuto abilities make her a formidable captain, and she is also more strategically inclined than the captains ranked below her. Although she can be brash at times, she demonstrates the ability to work well with others when it's necessary. This is best shown in her battle against Baragon when she coordinates incredibly well with Hachi in order to defeat the second ranking Espada. Thankfully, Soifon does get some screen time during the final arc, which helps to boost her power, although not enough to place her above other captains. We can at least take some solace in the fact that the current Soifon is stronger than her previous self, but she still lacks any real relevance when compared to the other captains. Let's talk about the power-ups that she receives during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, as these really do impact on her growth. After her Bankai is stolen by BG9, Soifon devotes herself to improving and perfecting her Shunko, which she successfully achieves. This allows her to put up a decent fight against BG9 before she gets humiliated once again. I've expressed my views on this fight quite vocally in my video dedicated to it, so I'm going to avoid going over too much covered ground here, but basically the power-up that she receives is inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. At least we can argue that it had stalled BG9 long enough for Urahara to send the Shadow Infiltration pills for her to regain her Bankai. As a result, we can determine that Soifon does get notably more powerful, but at the same time it feels like a power-up that was at most on par with her Bankai. Not to mention that its powers couldn't be used in conjunction with her Bankai, so it's merely an alternative means for her to fight. This is better than what the captains ranked below her ended up receiving, but it still isn't anything really noteworthy. I do hope that Soifon's character is developed further in the story, as her mastery of Hakuda and Ho-Ho gives her a unique fighting style that very few characters can imitate, and I'd like to see a deeper expansion of this side of a character. Her mastering Shunko was definitely a step in the right direction, but its execution was underwhelming. Overall, Soifon is a good fighter and she possesses a very dangerous Shikai and Bankai, but unfortunately all the benefits of her arsenal are heavily nerfed by her low levels of spiritual energy. This cripples her ability to fully function as she should. One of the highlights of her existence in the story was having Suzume Bachi's instant death hacks get negated by Aizen. While it's understandable because it is Aizen, that scene just buried her in a way that honestly needs to be studied, as she never really recovered from this moment. But let's now move on to the number 22 spot. This next captain is none other than Love Aikawa. Placing him was quite challenging for me, as Love isn't weak by any definition, as he has demonstrated that he can hold his own against a fully released Stark by just using his Hollow Mask and his Shikai alone. Both he and Rose had earned Stark's praise for being strong, worthy opponents, thus prompting Stark to release his full power. This is an impressive feat considering that Love wasn't even using his full strength. However, there is a small problem, because Love suffers from the same issue as Lisa, Iba and Isane, in that we've never seen the full extent of his power. This is unfortunate because he has an extremely strong foundation that could have been developed further. So let's talk about what we do know about his character, starting with his hollow powers. Now these grant him immense strength and overall physical enhancements, thus allowing him to rip hollows apart with his bare hands. Unfortunately, aside from some loosely implied fire abilities possessed by his Shikai, we don't know anything else about him. It's frustrating to discover that he was actually a captain and most likely has far more abilities than what we have seen. However, without any more information at this point within Bleach, we cannot deduce what those abilities might have been until we find out what Love can really do, and this is about as high as I can rank him on this list. Coming in at the number 21 spot is the character that we all love to hate on, and it's Rose Otoribashi. This is the third Vizard captain in our ranking so far, and discussing Rose's power level is peculiar because there's a lot of inconsistency surrounding it. Similar to Love, Rose is introduced as a character who can casually hang with a serious Coyote Stark. Stark even praises his strength when the three fight, and based on this we can easily tell that Rose isn't a fodder character. Even with just his Shikai and Hollow Mask, he can fight on par with Stark. However, during the final arc, Rose didn't use this power, instead he relies on his Bankai Bankai, which is very powerful, but his refusal to use his Hollow Mask makes him function at half of his full potential. Theoretically, we should have seen him fight at a much greater capacity in his battle against Mask D Masculine. I think that he probably didn't have much of a chance to use it, as he was caught off guard by Mask D Masculine's Star Flash. He is also a great team player and consistently coordinates with fellow captains and Vizards in battle. I would also assume that he has captain level mastery over Kido. Focusing too much on his Bankai might be misleading because his Shikai also has some interesting abilities, as it allows Rose to use his music in a more hands-on manner where he fires off music and presumably certain frequencies which can physically decimate a target. We see him do this against the army of Menos and Stark's wolf constructs. Having such an ability would be more than enough, but Rose's greatest enemy isn't any other character in the story but rather himself. Rose has an extremely dramatic personality which causes him to focus more on giving a performance during a fight than actually doing the fighting. This leads to decisions like waiting for his opponent to step within a certain range to get killed in style, or my personal favourite when he was blabbing on about how his Bankai works, which ironically is the last thing that someone with a Bankai like his should do, and this fatal flaw ended up costing him, as he had practically given away the weakness to his power, thus allowing his opponent to best him. His strange preference not to use his Hollow Mask during the final arc causes him to lack the extra physical power that he definitely needs in order to overcome his inability to stay quiet. But what does this mean for Rose? Considering everything, he is still a very powerful captain, but he just has the greatest case of main character syndrome in all of Bleach. His personality affects his efficiency as a fighter so badly that this was the most reasonable placement that I could have given him on this list. In the number 20 spot, we have Kensei Muguruma, who competes closely with Rose for the title of the biggest fraud amongst the captains. His only redeeming quality is his cool demeanor, which is also the primary reason that I'd placed him above Rose. The two are implied to be within the same power range, but the core difference lies in their fighting styles. This distinction more than anything else justifies Kensei's higher placement, because simply put, Rose's desire to be as dramatic as possible during fights gives him a slight handicap compared to someone like Kensei, who prefers a more straightforward approach. This means that despite having similar power levels, Kensei's mindset as a fighter gives him a significant advantage. Now let's dive into Kensei himself. His initial showings don't really sell him as a top tier character by any means. He loses to Wonderwise off screen, and he doesn't accomplish much of substance aside from killing Aizen's fodder Menos. Unlike Rose, he doesn't fight any Espada, but I still believe that he and Rose are in the same power bracket. Not counting the power of his holification, he performs extremely well against Mask D Masculine during the final arc, a character who was scaled above the version of Stark that Rose was able to keep up with earlier in the story. Now this was a version of Mask who had already received multiple power buffs from his superstar ability due to him fighting with the lieutenants prior to Kensei's arrival. In addition to this, Kensei, like Rose, had fought Mask without using his Hollow Mask, and he had relied solely on his Bankai. Considering the power gained from holification, it is estimated to be around the same level as a Bankai, so it baffles me why he didn't use his Hollow Mask in conjunction with his Bankai. As using only one power source at a time, Kensei is still strong enough to fight against top Espada level enemy. Number 19 spot, we have Kaname Tozen. This is a captain who I found rather difficult to pinpoint what his best truly is. It's heavily implied that despite the immense power growth that he had attained from his holification, it had also caused him to fall behind as a fighter. This does raise an intriguing question. Is Tozen at his best in his weaker Shinigami form where he is more aware and skilled, or is exponentially more powerful but less careful holified self? Starting with his base form, Tozen demonstrates total mastery of all Shinigami combat arts, considering that he could effortlessly cast Hien, which was strong enough to destroy Grimmjow's severed arm. It indicates that he's a master at using Kido. He's also known to be an exceptional teacher and a master of Zanjutsu. Even in his base form, both he and Gin were implied to be more powerful than all of the Espada. Considering that Aizen had found most of the Espada to be disappointments, yet he still kept Gin and Tozen around, as this appears to be sufficient proof that they were very powerful allies. Undeniably, Gin and Touzen both possessed impressive levels of power for a Shinigami at that point in the story. Touzen's Zanpakuto abilities are also shown to be quite formidable, but the Bankai is really where the money is, as it encases him and his enemies along with the surrounding area in a black veil which robs them of their sight, sound, and all of their other senses aside from their sense of touch. Unless your opponent is Kinpachi Zaraki, who was also conveniently the person that it was used against, a Bankai like Touzen's would be all that you need to guarantee victory for yourself. After gaining hollow powers from Aizen, Touzen receives an immense power boost which allows him to go toe-to-toe with Komamura's Bankai, along with some really nifty high-speed regeneration that he also acquires. Not to mention whatever the hell that Resurrection was that he activated. Touzen was pretty careless once he had gained his hollow powers, and it's for this reason that these abilities were only on screen for a brief amount of time. It's for this reason that I couldn't really place Touzen above this position within this list, as I feel like other characters in comparison had more opportunities to showcase the full extent of their abilities. So before you go raging in the comments, this is the reason why I ranked Touzen so low. In the number 18 spot, we have none other than Seijin Komamura. Now some of you might have expected him to rank a bit higher, but you have to remember that this ranking list is evaluating captains at their very peak. You may have guessed that I don't really rank Dangaijo's power very highly. I believe that Dangaijo is extremely overrated and wouldn't have been very effective in the story, especially in the endgame of the final arc. Some fans do argue that Komamura should have fought more in the final arc, but that would have been a disastrously bad idea, given the kinds of battles that we saw later on. Now let's talk about my issues with Dangaijo. Remember how Mugetsu condensed all of Ichigo's power into one transcendent slash, but at the cost of his abilities? Dangaijo is similar but actually worse, as it grants Komamura temporary immortality for a brief, almost negligible period, and it's just enough for him to defeat a single enemy. It's an ability designed solely for revenge, as it sacrifices everything else in exchange for one victory. This makes it extremely impractical in combat scenarios because, like Mugetsu, it comes at a very steep price. It robs the user of their sense of reason, thus reducing them to a wild animal. This is a massive cost just for a few minutes of immortality. Moreover, Komamura lacks remarkable skills in other areas of combat in order to warrant him being ranked any higher on this list. In summary, while Dangaijo is a powerful ability, its impracticality and steep cost combined with Komamura's unremarkable combat skills in other areas guarantees Komamura the number 18th spot and nothing higher. So next in the 17th spot is Shinji Hirako. The deeper that I delve into these rankings, the more apparent that it becomes just how tough the 1000-year Blood War arc was for the Vizards. After returning to his original position as a captain, we see him accomplish, well, absolutely nothing noteworthy aside from running around the battlefield in various instances. The anime does attempt to give him some extra shine with a Bankai reveal, but even this ends unspectacularly when he loses to Bambiata. Overall, Shinji occupies an interesting position in this ranking list because it's when you consider everything else aside from his performance in the final arc. Shinji's best power showcases occur earlier in the story, particularly during the Arrancar arc. As the implied leader of the Vizards, it stands to reason that he is likely the most powerful member of this group. He effortlessly overwhelms Grimmjow early on, and despite being familiar with Aizen's powers, he believes himself to be strong enough to keep up with him. He is the only Vizard who goes straight for Aizen upon arrival, which speaks volumes about his confidence and power. He is definitely a more powerful Shinigami than any of his Vizard counterparts, which is the main reasoning behind the position that he has on this list. Shinji, like the other Vizards, never really fights to his full potential during the 1000-year Blood War arc, and we don't really see him utilize his hollow mask after he returns to his captain position. I do have a separate video on the channel as I offer several explanations behind why the Vizards didn't use the hollow masks during the final arc. In terms of Shinji's Bankai, it is extremely reliant upon the situation that he finds himself in. His Bankai is pretty much useless in a one-on-one situation, and it's only effective when he is outnumbered. Also, another weakness of his Bankai is that it affects attacks everyone within the range of his Bankai indiscriminately, thus effectively making it useless when his allies are around. So despite being the strongest Vizard, Shinji's showings are inconsistent, and our inability to see him fight at his full potential prevents us from fully scaling his power, and this is why he is ranked in the number 17 spot. Next at number 16 is Rukia Kuchiki, another new captain who, in my opinion, has proven her worth many times over. Her journey towards becoming a captain is an often overlooked part of her character development, and I wish more people appreciated that. Let's now dive into why she's ranked number 16, as I'm sure that some of you were hoping to see her placed a bit higher on the list. Throughout most of Bleach, Rukia's power remains relatively stagnant until the 1000-Year Blood War arc, where she receives a massive boost. This is following her training with Squad Zero, where Rukia unlocks the true power of Soreno Shirayuki and uses its deadly abilities in order to defeat her enemies. Given the implication that her power is at least equal to Renji's, we can conclude that she easily outclasses the Vizard captains who had struggled against and were even defeated by relatively weaker Sternritter, and this is partly why Rukia ranks above them. Rukia's new power lies in her ability to manipulate temperatures, specifically lowering them. She can reduce her body temperature to absolute zero and can also lower the temperature of anything that comes into contact with her to that same degree. This is essentially an insta-kill ability since nothing can survive absolute zero temperatures. With her newly enhanced speed and strength, Rukia would have little to no trouble tagging her opponents and taking them down. Additionally, this is Rukia 12 years after the events of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, so she has most likely overcome the weaknesses of her true Zanpakuto's abilities, and she has gotten used to using her Bankai. We even see glimpses of this future power in the future Rukia character from Bleach Brave Souls, a game whose staff work closely with Kubo and have contributed to the building of Bleach's lore with some of its content. So it wouldn't be wrong to assume that the Bleach Brave Souls game accurately represents Rukia's current powers. Rukia has always been an exceptionally talented Kido user, and it's obvious that her Kido prowess has significantly increased over the years. This makes her an extremely versatile fighter, as she is also an intelligent and driven Shinigami whose spirit is as strong as her power. In my opinion, Rukia exemplifies the new generation surpassing the old, and I eagerly anticipate seeing how much she contributes during the Bleach Hell arc. In the number 15th spot is the novel exclusive captain Kinpachi Kurashiki. From everything that we know, Kurashiki was an incredibly powerful character even without considering his Bankai. His prowess was so renowned that he was offered a place within the Zero Division, but he had refused, believing that he needed to stay within the Soul Society in order to continue his role as Kinpachi. This has intriguing implications, because typically membership into Squad Zero is linked to a new invention which plays an integral part to the Soul Society. Unless Kurashiki was so extraordinarily powerful that Ichibei was willing to make an exception, if this is the case, then it suggests that Kurashiki was really powerful. This makes his position here all the more frustrating, because based on his potential, he could have ranked way higher on this list, as this brings us to the elephant in the room, which is his Bankai. Kurashiki's Bankai creates a gigantic mouth wherever he is, and it swallows the entire area. Yes, it is that simple. His Bankai completely destroys both living and non-living things that are within its vicinity, indiscriminately consuming everything within its range except for Kurashiki himself. It is challenging to visualize the speed and appearance of this Bankai due to the severe lack of visuals that we have, but we have enough character statements and in-universe lore which suggests that it happens quickly enough to threaten even top-tier captains. Considering Kurashiki was invited to join Squad Zero, most likely because of his immense strength, there is reason to believe that his Bankai is as powerful as it sounds. With such a powerful Bankai, there might be a significant drawback, you would think. Well, this Bankai has one of the biggest limitations in all of Bleach, which is a cooldown period. In the case of Kurashiki's Bankai, he needs to wait a cooldown period of 6 months in order to use it again. Now, this is what makes it even worse, because Kurashiki doesn't just lose his ability to use his Bankai for 6 months, but this also includes all of his Zanpakuto's powers, including its Shikai, which all become unavailable to him. This means that for one massive show of power, Kurashiki Kurashiki has to essentially be powerless for half a year. While he doesn't lose his spiritual power, it's still an incredibly massive nerf and quite a high price to pay just for using his Bankai. This loss of power is actually what allows Asashiro to defeat Kurashiki when the latter challenges him for his position as Kinpachi. Moving on to the number 14th position, we have Byakuya Kuchiki. Now this placement again may surprise some of you, but let me explain why I have ranked him at the 14th spot. Byakuya is undeniably an immensely powerful character. He's an absolute master of virtually every form of Shinigami combat art, including Hakuda, Ho-Ho, Zanjutsu, and Kido. Byakuya is one of the few captains who proves to be exceptionally well-rounded. His skill is so advanced that even when disarmed and fighting an opponent wielding his own Zanpakuto, Byakuya can parry sword slashes barehanded. By his own admission, he could have easily killed Hisagi if he had used just his Kido spells. Now this is a testament to his high level of skill. His mastery of all combat arts allows him to mix up his fighting techniques in a way that is rare amongst the other Shinigami in the story. He had seamlessly combined his swordsmanship with the immense power of his Zanpakuto during his battle against Ichigo, which highlighted that Byakuya is quite a force to be reckoned with. So why is it that he is only ranked in the 14th spot? While yes, Byakuya does become more powerful in the final arc, I feel that his strength might be somewhat overrated. Many of his feats in the final arc suggest a significant increase in strength, but are often considered without the necessary context. For example, via some anime exclusive scenes, the anime had clarified that him defeating the Sternritter trio was due to multiple factors that I've mentioned in other videos. Additionally, him taking down Jirard with Ika Senjinka was only possible because Jirard's power had been negated by Hitsugaya's eyes. Therefore, I don't think that Byakuya truly scales up to the level of Jirard. Even with all of this in mind, Byakuya remains a very powerful captain, just not at the level where he would rank higher compared to some of the other captains that I've placed above him. Coming in at the 13th position is Yoruichi Shihoin as we enter into the top 13 powerful captains of the Gotei 13. Yoruichi's role as a captain is often overlooked within the story, as we only see her briefly in that role. However, her character is well developed throughout Bleach, and she proves her worth in gold with what we've seen from her. Starting with the fact that she doesn't use a Zanpakuto and has a preference for fighting solely with Hakuda. Yoruichi's arsenal of attacks is the most intriguing out of all of the characters in the story. Her role as the head of the Shihoin clan gives her access to an array of ancient weapons, ranging from those that grant the ability to fly to those that are capable of destroying the unsealed Sokyoku. While this aspect of her character is barely explored in battle, it does hold a lot of potential for Yoruichi's role in the Hell arc. Kubo even hinted at this during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, as he had shown Yushido carrying numerous mystical artifacts which were intended for Yoruichi to use. Hopefully we will get to see her utilize these artifacts via some anime exclusive scenes of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Next, we have Yoruichi's skill in Hakuda, and it's no exaggeration to say that it takes a special kind of madness in order to choose to fight barehanded in a universe where everyone is wielding a sword. Yoruichi is disinterested in her Zanpakuto's abilities, and her fighting style is an absolute powerhouse as she is entirely focused on Hakuda. She's capable of defeating very skilled swordsmen with just her bare hands, which alone warrants her greater respect as a hand-to-hand combatant. We can't discuss Yoruichi's Hakuda skills without mentioning the two foundational abilities that support her combat style. These of course are her immense skill in Kido and Ho-Ho. When it comes to Flash Step, Yoruichi is a master. She can casually outpace fellow experts like Byakuya, and she can even create multiple after images with her movements, and she can combine her speed with Hakuda in order to dispatch hundreds of enemies within seconds. Yoruichi's speed allows her to easily evade the attacks and powers of her enemies. In addition to this, Yoruichi also has her Shunko, which is a perfect blend of Kido and Hakuda, as Shunko enhances her offensive capabilities beyond what one would expect from regular fists. This boost in her power had allowed her to wound Chrysalis Aizen. She's also demonstrated that her Shunko can overpower Askin Naklevar, who had relied on his death-dealing ability in order to survive Yoruichi's onslaught. This feat alone, in my opinion, surpasses anything that Byakuya has accomplished on his own in the 1000 Year Blood War arc. Yoruichi's ability to defeat a Shoot Starfall member single-handedly stands out, whereas Byakuya only lands a finishing move on a nearly defenseless opponent. In summary, Yoruichi is an incredibly powerful captain, however, her self-imposed limitations and the fact that her most powerful form reduces her to a wild beast do hold her back in comparison to some of the more broken captains that we're about to discuss that have ranked above her. This makes Yoruichi the perfect bridge into the upper echelon of the top 13 captains of the Gotei 13. Coming in at the 12th spot is a choice that will likely stir up a lot of controversy, but it's a decision that I feel compelled to make given the criteria of this ranking. The number 12th spot goes to none other than Kenpachi Izashiro. Before diving into the specifics of Izashiro, it's essential to establish a foundational principle when comparing Shinigami directly. Unlike scenarios where characters from different factions or races interact with each other differently, Shinigami powers operate under one simple rule, which is Reiatsu. When two Shinigami clash, the effectiveness of their abilities against each other is primarily determined by who has the higher Reiatsu. This means that in Shinigami battles, victory isn't solely about who possesses the best abilities, as reserves of Reiatsu also play a massive factor. A perfect example of this is Izashiro's fight with Kenpachi. Despite having a superior arsenal and outclassing Kenpachi in many ways, as the battle had progressed, Kenpachi's rapidly increasing Reiatsu had started to negate all of Izashiro's advantages. You might wonder why this is significant. Well, the issue lies in the fact that Izashiro wasn't outclassed by just any character, but by pre-1000 Year Blood War arc Kenpachi. Yes, this was Kenpachi before he had activated his Shikai and his Bankai. This implies that despite Urozakuro's incredibly broken abilities, Izashiro would be utterly destroyed by numerous characters, especially the Quincy, who are his natural enemies due to their ability to absorb Reishi. Additionally, nearly all of the captains who reveal their true powers or attain significant power-ups during the 1000 Year Blood War arc would also be able to completely outscale Izashiro. This includes all of the characters that I'm about to mention from this point onwards. In conclusion, Izashiro is undoubtedly a powerful Shinigami, but he suffers from the most devastating setback for a villain in a battle shonen, and it's that he just simply appears way too early on in the story. In the 11th spot, we have Yushiro Ukitake, who might seem like a controversial placement because on paper, many of you probably expected him to rank a bit higher on this list. Now, this assumption is based on numerous statements made about him in the story and the implied level of power that he's believed to possess. Let's break this down and explain why I believe these statements may have led to some misconceptions. Firstly, both Ukitake and Shunsui are stated to be Yamamoto's star pupils. They were the very first to graduate from Shino Academy, and they also have a reputation for being unparalleled in combat, even being called transcendent. When Shunsui went on to become the formidable warrior we know and love, Ukitake wasn't as fortunate. Despite numerous statements within Bleach implying that Ukitake has immense power, what we see often contradicts these claims. For example, Ukitake struggles to defeat a fodder hollow-like Metastasia due to his illness, and he gets sucker punched by Wonderwise and loses off-screen to an unknown Sternritter during the first invasion. These instances highlight that Ukitake, due to his illness and his frailty, is unable to fully utilize the power that he supposedly possesses. This brings me to my main point about Ukitake, which is that he is undoubtedly one of the strongest captains in all of Bleach, but his illness severely limits his ability to use his full power. This limitation is why he is ranked in the 11th spot, but however, for fellow Ukitake fans, there is still hope, as the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime is still ongoing, and we could potentially have new feats for Ukitake shown to us via some anime exclusive scenes when he performs the Kamikake ritual. It's implied that he would have been able to exert himself much more afterward, which does suggest that Kubo had intended for Ukitake to have a bit more of a role within the story, but for whatever reason things didn't transpire like that within the manga. Until the anime exclusive scenes within Core 3, this is as high as Ukitake is going to get within the rankings of this video, since I do believe that there are characters who have demonstrated far better feats who deserve to be placed above him. We have now reached reach the top 10 captains of the Gotei 13, and we have none other than Gin Ichimaru. Before you get too upset, I need you to hear me out because I believe that Gin Ichimaru definitely deserves this ranking. Let's go over everything that we know about Gin along with some of his feats. Similar to Tozen, Gin Ichimaru is implied to be more powerful than all of the Espada, and there isn't much in the story that contradicts this. In fact, several feats support this claim, like when Gin had fought against Ichigo following his battle against Ukiura. At this point, Ichigo had already fought Yami in his Resurrection form, yet Gin holds his own against him and makes him struggle quite a bit. However, I don't think that Ichigo would have struggled much with Gin if he were in the right mental state, considering how significant his mental state is to his fighting ability. But it's also clear that Gin wasn't taking Ichigo seriously and had only wanted to feel him out, so it's still inconclusive whether if peak Ichigo could have taken him down. So being ranked above the Espada isn't a crowning achievement, as almost every character in the 1000 Year Blood War arc surpasses them. Gin has another very impressive feat, and this is against Transcendent Aizen. You might think that Aizen was off guard and the Kamishini no Yari had only worked because it had caught him by surprise, but this is not entirely true. This argument applies only to the initial stab with his Bankai, which Aizen didn't see coming. Everything that happened after the stab had occurred while Aizen was fully aware. As I explained when discussing Zashiro, when Shinigami fight, their ability to use their power effectively against each other depends on their Reiatsu. This means that landing a successful hit is less important than having the Reiatsu to inflict the intended effect. Otherwise, it would be another Siphon situation where the hack's ability is negated despite meeting its conditions. If Aizen was just simply caught off guard, then he could have negated Kamishini no Yari's ability with his Reiatsu. The fact that he had released his Reiatsu when disintegrating suggests that he had tried but failed to negate the attack, as Aizen had ultimately needed the Hokyoku in order to survive the attack. Gin's feat is heavily underrated, as he is the only character aside from Ichigo who in fact had inflicted fatal damage on a Transcendent Aizen, and this alone is a massive accomplishment. In terms of Gin being placed above Ukitake, well, it's because he is effortlessly more powerful than characters that Ukitake had struggled against, like Wonderwise and Stark. Also, Ukitake's illness might have nerfed his ability to fight, but this doesn't change the fact that Gin did have better showings within the series. In summary, as a Shinigami, Gin Ichimaru was a prodigy who we had lost way too soon. Considering how Hitsugaya had turned out, I would have loved to see Gin's potential fully actualized. His feats against Aizen suggest that we never saw his full capabilities because he had saved it all for Aizen. While I could argue for a higher ranking, this placement seems the most reasonable for Gin Ichimaru. In the number 9 spot, we have another fan favorite, and it's Unohana Yachiru, or Unohana Retsu. As a member of the original Gotei 13, Unohana possesses an array of incredible skills. Let's begin by talking about her swordsmanship, as she is a master of Zanjutsu and has earned a reputation for defeating numerous masters. Prior to joining the Gotei 13, she was regarded as the most dangerous criminal within all of the Soul Society. In the 1000 Year Blood War arc, we learn about her true bloodthirsty nature, and how she had left mountains of corpses in her wake. Even after forsaking her violent ways for over 1,000 years, she had shown no signs of rust when she had faced off against Kinpachi when she was training him during the final arc. The way that she was able to put the pressure on Kinpachi alone proves that she is far stronger than Soya Azashiro, who had lost to a weaker version of Kinpachi. What's even more impressive is that before Kinpachi landed his first successful hit on Unohana, she had fought him using solely Zanjutsu. And to clarify, she was going up against Kinpachi, who wasn't holding back, and she had handled him with pure sword skill alone. This is practically impressive considering that Azashiro couldn't handle a much weaker Kinpachi despite using every tool in his arsenal. Unohana inflicted fatal damage against Kinpachi numerous times during their initial scuffle, as this further establishes her as a very formidable opponent. Aside Aside from her mastery of Zanjutsu, another significant aspect of her character is her vast experience. Both Unohana and Yamamoto are the only remaining survivors of the original Gotei 13. This means that she had as much time as Yamamoto in order to perfect her powers, potentially possessing a more refined Bankai, given that she was always on the lookout for strong opponents and was continuously fighting. This extensive experience that Unohana has honed her abilities as a warrior, thus also making her a master of Kido and especially Kaido. For Unohana, time was on her side when she decided to rebrand herself, as she had learned Kaido from Tenjiro Kirinji, and she had become such a proficient healer that she was appointed as captain of the Soul Society's medical division Squad 4. This is a stark contrast against her original role within the Gotei 13. Unohana's skill in Kaido allows her to heal her injuries and extend her fighting duration, and this is demonstrated during her battle against Kinpachi. But her healing skills aren't the only impressive thing about her, because there is also her Zanpakuto called Minazuki. Minazuki's Shikai appears to have healing abilities, and its Bankai appears to have the power to automatically heal herself and her opponent. This raises the question of why she even needs Kaido in the first place. Minazuki's Shikai can heal more people at once than she could ever do with Kaido alone, and her Bankai automatically heals any damage. In summary, Unohana is the best of both worlds, as she combines incredible offense and defense, and aside from Kinpachi Zaraki, she is easily the most deserving character of the Kinpachi title. In the number 8 position, we have a true Shinigami prodigy, and it's none other than Toshiro Hitsugaya. Additionally, I never imagined that Hitsugaya would even crack the top 10 on a list of the most powerful captains in the story. This is because for the majority of the story, he remains painfully underwhelming, often becoming the butt of jokes for talking big but then constantly getting defeated. However, Hitsugaya's reputation as a top tier jobber gets completely erased after the game-changing power-up that he receives during the final arc. Now, this power-up undeniably grants him a seat among the most powerful Shinigami to ever live. Let's begin with the core aspect of Hitsugaya's power, which are his Zanpakuto's abilities. These revolve around creating and manipulating ice. Before unlocking the true power of his Zanpakuto, Hitsugaya could use these abilities in a variety of ways. He was able to manipulate the weather, create deadly constructs, and even create pseudo-illusions with his ice clones. Despite sounding impressive on paper, these abilities often fell short in battle due to Hitsugaya's inexperience and his low levels of Reiatsu and just his general lack of power. However, this changes dramatically during the final arc when Hitsugaya unlocks the true power of his Bankai, thus granting him mastery over the essence of his Zanpakuto's abilities. With this newfound power, Hitsugaya can do everything that he could do before, but on a much greater scale. He also gains an extremely deadly ability, which is the negation of all supernatural functions of whatever his ice comes into contact with. As I've mentioned in other ranking videos, this is one of the most overpowered abilities within Bleach. His ability to negate powers extends even to those that are conceptual in nature, meaning that almost no character in the story can resist his powers. The second reason why this power is so deadly is the immense increase in Reiatsu that it comes with. Earlier I spoke about how one of Hitsugaya's main drawbacks as a fighter was his low levels of Reiatsu, which had made it easy for enemies to dispel his attacks and to trivialize most of his techniques. However, with his mature Bankai, this problem is completely resolved. Hitsugaya tests out his abilities against an enemy who wasn't just a Schutzstaffel or the strongest Sternritter, but also one who had just received a massive power-up from assimilating Kinpachi's Bankai power. Yet Hitsugaya effortlessly overpowers this version of Gerard Valkyrie and even destroys his sword Hoffnung. So not only does Hitsugaya have a very broken ability, but he also has the Reiatsu to back it up. Now, despite having all of the right powers to be one of the top characters in the series, Hitsugaya is still very inexperienced compared to the other captains in the story. So much so that despite this perfect power set, I still found it hard to place him any higher on this list, as I believe that there are still 7 captains who are more worthy of the upcoming positions that we've yet yet to talk about. So moving on, in the number 7th spot we have none other than Mayuri Kurotsuchi. He's a captain that I find particularly fascinating to discuss because he defies the expectations of what a powerful character should be. He's not the best fighter, and he doesn't possess immense amounts of Reiatsu, and he doesn't have a single overpowered ability that nullifies his opponent's powers. I like to think of Mayuri as an all-rounder, as I think that he combines a little bit of everything necessary in order to make fighting him a total nightmare. I don't really have one particular ability of Mayuri's that I would rate really highly, because I think with a character like Mayuri, it's best to look at him as a whole. Unlike individuals like Ichigo and Kinpachi, Mayuri lacks natural talent for swordsmanship, but he compensates for this by programming his sword to fight for him. He isn't a Reiatsu monster like Aizen, but he has enough to knock out characters like Kinpachi, and while he doesn't bulldoze his way through fights with broken abilities like Yhwach's Almighty, he does compensate with his creative and inventive mind. Mayuri is a compelling character because despite his imperfections, he always finds ways to rise above them. Let's now delve into why he ranks so highly on this list, as we start off with his Zanpakuto abilities. While Matai Fukuin Shotai is promising, its limited ability to handle extra variables and its reliance on Mayuri experiencing an ability firsthand make it a very risky tool. Mayuri's greatest asset without doubt is his mind. Mayuri Zanpakuto often plays a minor role in his battles, and it's usually the first variable to be neutralized. What truly wins Mayuri his battles is his scientific genius and his knack for concocting perfect counters to his opponent's powers, along with his ability to adapt on the fly. This is what makes Mayuri so dangerous. He is acutely aware of his weaknesses, and he constantly improves himself through his greatest strength, which is his knowledge. He studies his own allies to a disturbingly deep degree, and even keeps their blood samples on hand. It should come as no surprise that Mayuri has likely prepared contingency plans for every known character in the story based on his knowledge of them. Overall, Mayuri is a living embodiment of the age-old saying, knowledge is power. However, even his intellect might not be enough against characters with overwhelming power, which is why 7th place is all that he's going to get. In the number 6 position, we have one of the most underrated Shinigami in all of Bleach, and it's none other than Isshin Kurosaki. Many seem to have forgotten just how powerful Isshin truly is, so let's remind everyone why he isn't just the best dad in all of shonen, but also one of the most formidable Shinigami that we've seen. Isshin is an exceptionally experienced and skilled fighter, as his proficiency extends across all of the known Shinigami combat arts. One of the greatest testaments to his skill is his ability to fight base Aizen to the point of exhaustion. While much of this battle happened off screen, there's ample evidence to suggest that Isshin didn't even use his Shikai against Aizen, which is very impressive. He went toe-to-toe with Aizen in combat and effortlessly tanked direct Kido blasts from him, which is a first for any character at that point in the story. Isshin's streak of greatness doesn't just stop here, as he later fights Chrysalis Aizen once again in his base form and is successfully able to damage his shell with a Getsuga Tensho. For the record, this was far more damage than Yoruichi's armored gauntlets could inflict. Another significant aspect of Isshin's power is his Reiatsu. As a Shinigami noble, Isshin possesses high levels of Reiatsu. This is a trait that is often discussed about Ichigo, but not nearly enough about Isshin. One of Isshin's most impressive feats is his endurance in holding back the Koryu with his spiritual pressure in the Dangai just so that Ichigo could train. This feat is even more remarkable considering Isshin had been beaten unconscious after a grueling battle with base Aizen before he had faced off against him again after Aizen had merged with the Hokyoku. This implies that Isshin accomplished this feat when he wasn't even at full strength, suggesting that he could have lasted much longer if he hadn't been already beaten down by Aizen. The fact that he had performed all of these feats in his base form makes them even more impressive. Unfortunately, we see very little of Isshin's abilities with his Zanpakuto Engetsu aside from what he had demonstrated when he was younger during the Everything But the Rain flashback arc. It's revealed that Engetsu is a fire-type Zanpakuto with some abilities that are tied to Isshin's blood, as this explains why Aizen knew he could handicap Isshin's ability to use his Bankai if he had wounded him first. The lack of insight into the full scope of Engetsu's abilities, particularly its Bankai, is the main reason why Isshin isn't ranked any higher on this list, as he takes the 6th spot as the strongest ranking captain. We're breaking into the top 5 as we have a Shinigami who needs no introduction, and it's Shunsui Kyoraku. He is undeniably worthy of being recognized as the 5th strongest captain in all of Bleach. Shunsui is a character who has no real weakness and he excels in every area. He is a one-of-a-kind genius whose skill with the sword is only rivaled by his intellect. Let's start with his skill. Shunsui is an immensely talented swordsman with a reputation for being an absolute powerhouse. This is expected since he and Ukitake are Yamamoto's star pupils, and seemingly they were the first graduates of Shino Academy. This would mean that Shunsui and Ukitake were part of the first generation of captains who were raised after the original generation. This speaks to the insane amount of experience that both Shunsui and Ukitake would have gained. In addition to broadening their perspectives due to the advancements of the new era, they had the opportunity to learn from the older generation, thus grounding their knowledge in history. The original Gotei 13 must have made for phenomenal masters, which is likely why Shunsui in particular is so powerful. Talking about all of this honestly just drives home how disappointing Ukitake turned out to be, considering that he's supposed to be on level with Shunsui in pretty much everything. Hopefully the anime can redeem that, but back to Shunsui, as his great Zanjutsu skills are further bolstered by his intellect and cunning. Shunsui is a deceptively laid-back character whose easygoing nature belies his more dangerous and manipulative side. This makes him extremely hard to predict in combat and makes fighting him all the more challenging. In addition to mastery over all of the Shinigami combat arts, Shunsui possesses a very powerful Zanpakuto. The Shikai of Katen Kyokotsu allows him to manifest children's games into reality, and he forces himself and his opponent to play by the rules of these games. It's one of the most versatile abilities in all of Bleach, and it introduces many ways for Shunsui to defeat his opponents. Combined with his cunning nature, it makes him a million times more deadly. Shunsui's Bankai, on the other hand, takes it up a notch as it traps himself and his opponent in a 4-part play that I cannot wait to see animated in the upcoming 3rd core of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Its power is so immense that the mere release of his Bankai had given multiple characters the chills. Its Reiatsu was so immense and ominous that it had triggered a fight or flight reaction in everybody who was present, which is a unique flex that only Shunsui can make. One noticeable thing about Shunsui is that every aspect of his character complements the other. His incredible cunning fits perfectly with the versatility of his Zanpakuto's abilities, and it perfectly matches his immense Reiatsu reserves, giving his abilities lethal effectiveness. Overall, he is just a fantastic captain, and he is more than deserving of the 5th position on this list. In the number 4 position, we have a captain that I've been very eager to discuss for a long time, and it's the humble candy store owner Kisuke Urahara. He is a peerless genius with countless achievements under his belt, and in my opinion, he is the 4th most powerful captain of all time. Let's start with his greatest asset, which is his intelligence. Urahara is without a doubt the most intelligent character in the story. Although Mayuri may contest this, Urahara's superior intellect is evident. His resume practically narrates the story of Bleach, from saving Masaki's life and indirectly enabling Ichigo's birth, to inventing the Hokyoku that completed Aizen's, and even discovering the method to restore the Shinigami's lost Bankai. Urahara is just simply unparalleled. What's terrifying is that his creative brilliance shines through in combat as well. He can devise counters on the fly to match and outclass his enemy's abilities, and he can even concoct countermeasures to complex powers like Asukin's death dealing within minutes. This is how he temporarily strengthened Yoruichi, who was on the verge of death. Yhwach himself had seen Urahara as a threat, as he had designated him as one of the 5 great war potentials. Even Aizen admits that Urahara is his equal. Urahara is a master of all Shinigami arts to the point of teaching and nurturing other fighting geniuses like Ichigo Kurosaki. This mastery extends not only to his teaching abilities, but also to his very own combat skills. He has numerous feats such as fighting on par with Aizen, outsmarting and overwhelming him with Kido, and his Kido later becomes central in defeating Aizen. Urahara also holds a notable reputation as a swordsman within the Soul Society, with master swordsmen like Ikkaku easily linking Ichigo's talent to Urahara's mentorship. This wouldn't be possible if Urahara hadn't earned a name for himself within the Soul Society. He fights using a balanced mix of his inventions, sword skills, and his Zanpakuto Benihime. Benihime is a fascinating Zanpakuto with a more clearly defined Bankai than its Shikai. Benihime's Shikai allows a variety of abilities and skills, so many that it's actually challenging to tie them to a single parent power. If I were to guess, I'd say that Benihime's Shikai revolves around creating constructs which are both offensive and defensive in nature. We've seen Urahara release red energy blade strikes, he has created a shield that can double as an offensive weapon, and he has performed techniques like Juzu Tsunagi and Shibari, and these involve binding constructs which can also explode. There are also power negating abilities like Supane, which adds to the Shikai of Benihime. Urahara's Bankai Kanonbiraki Benihime Aratame allows him to restructure anything that its blade touches. This grants him abilities such as healing, power enhancement, matter manipulation, and many others that we have likely yet to see. I believe that this Bankai has the highest potential in all of Bleach due to its ability to restructure anything, especially when paired with Urahara's visionary genius. While I joke about Mayuri being able to solo the Bleach universe with all of his countermeasures, I'm serious when it comes to Urahara. Now let's turn our attention towards the top 3 captains of the Gotei 13. In the number 3 position, it's none other than head captain Yamamoto Genryusai. He is one of the most powerful old geezers in all of anime and manga, and he is the founder of the Gotei 13. Yamamoto needs very little introduction as he represents the pinnacle of Shinigami power, and he has significantly shaped many of the beloved characters that we've discussed so far in this video. This alone certifies him as an absolute great in the world of Bleach. But now let's dive into the real reason why we're all here, which is Yamamoto's power. He isn't just a master of the sword, but I'm almost certain that he had even invented some of the techniques that most Shinigami take for granted today, considering that he had headed his own school of swordsmanship, which used a fighting style literally named after him. It's more than enough indication that he is a master of the sword. Yamamoto's expertise can also be attributed to the immense experience that he has, as Yamamoto was throwing hands long before Zanpakuto were even invented. He likely possesses an unparalleled level of mastery over Hakuda and the other combat arts like no other Shinigami. For a considerable amount of time, Hakuda, Kido, and Ho-Ho were the only means that Shinigami had to fight. Therefore, for a few centuries, these combat arts were all that they had, meaning that there are masters from that era whose level of skill would likely remain uncontested by today's more Zanpakuto-focused era. Yamamoto is one of the few characters who has used Hakuda techniques in the story aside from Yoruichi. When combined with his mastery of Kido, Yamamoto is the definition of the perfect all-rounder. However, it's his Zanpakuto that elevates him even further from being merely powerful to just a downright godly Shinigami. Ryujin Jaka isn't just known as the strongest fire-type Zanpakuto, it is also the absolute peak of Zanpakuto power. It is a blade of hellfire whose nightmarishly powerful Shikai is only superseded by its world-shattering Bankai. Anime fans are very familiar with Yamamoto's Bankai thanks to the fantastic anime adaptation of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, so I'm sure that you can all agree with me when I said that it's single-handedly one of the most spectacular Bankai that we've seen within Bleach. It carries every bit of weight that a character like Yamamoto's full power is meant to carry, and it is a masterpiece of design. It doesn't get much better than a Bankai that threatens to blow up the planet because it is just that powerful. Moving on to the number 2 spot, we have Kinpachi Zaraki. Kinpachi is a monster whose power can't be replicated by any other Shinigami. He is the living embodiment of strength. Where do I even begin with Kinpachi's character? This is indeed the part where I break down everything that makes him the second strongest captain of all time, but Kinpachi is just a prodigy in his own right. While he has little to no knowledge of Zanjutsu, his lessons had to be immediately stopped after a single day of training because the Central 46 had deemed him too dangerous to be taught Zanjutsu. He has no knowledge of Kido because Kenpachi doesn't believe in it and he considers himself too good for it. He knows just enough about Flash Step to move from point A to point B, and that's literally it. And for over 80% of the Bleach story, he had neither a Shikai nor a Bankai, yet he is the strongest pure Shinigami in history. Despite his underdeveloped Shinigami skill set, Kenpachi possesses some extremely rare abilities that most other Shinigami lack. The first is his unparalleled battle instinct. As mentioned in my Kenpachi scaling video, he attacks, defends, and even detects his opponent's attacks on instinct alone. It doesn't matter what he's up against, as he will find a way around it and make his opponents have the worst day ever. This ability allows Kenpachi to fight on par with absolute masters and even defeat them despite his lack of formal Zanjutsu training. This is further enhanced by another superhuman ability that he possesses, which is his raw strength. Kenpachi is monstrously strong, and Yhwach had considered his strength such a threat that he was also designated as one of the 5 war potentials for this reason. This was well before Kenpachi had awakened his Zanpakuto's Shikai and Bankai. While the special abilities of his Zanpakuto are yet to be revealed, both Kenpachi's Shikai and Bankai elevate his physical strength to ungodly levels, allowing him to perform some truly mind-bending feats. These include decimating a meteor the size of the Serite with just a single slash, cutting through space itself, humiliating Gerard Valkyrie, and my personal favourite, one-shotting a primordial hollow who had just regained his name and power. All of these feats are proof that Kenpachi is the strongest living Shinigami. Originally, Kenpachi had one worrisome weakness, which was his obsession with finding a challenging opponent and having a thrilling battle. This was incompatible with his monstrous strength, which ensured that most opponents would fall with little effort. To enjoy fighting more, Kenpachi placed limitations upon his own power. Via the 1000-year Blood War arc, we learned that this was a weakness that he has now overcome. During the Can't For Your Own World light novels, he exhibits a whole new level of restraint. Despite still loving to fight, he now prioritizes his duty as a Shinigami over the thrill of battle. This is why he instantly destroyed Ikko Mikidomoe before he regained his true power. This is something that the earlier Kenpachi would not have done. The Kenpachi Zaraki from earlier in the story would have wanted to fight Ikko Mikidomoe instead, even if it had meant risking the fate of the Soul Society. While Kenpachi's character development played no role in his ranking, it remains still one of the most appealing aspects of his character. The amazing evolution and growth of Kenpachi's character is one of the reasons why he's such a beloved fan favorite character and why he secures the 2nd spot on this list. We have finally reached the number 1 position, and I'm sure all of you have guessed who holds this spot now. It's none other than Sosuke Aizen. The man, the myth, the legend, Aizen is so well known that simply mentioning his name is enough to acknowledge his unparalleled status as one of the greatest villains in all of shonen anime and manga. However, for those who might need a reminder of why Aizen is the greatest Shinigami to ever hold the title of captain, here's a quick breakdown of his exceptional qualities. One of Aizen's most defining traits is his intellect. While Urahara is often regarded as a tactical genius, most of his actions are countermeasures to Aizen's grand plans. Essentially, most of Bleach's storyline can be seen as a consequence of Aizen and Urahara's actions and counteractions. Despite Aizen admitting that his intellect falls short of Urahara's, he is still the 2nd greatest tactician in all of Bleach. His cautious nature is so profound that even with Gin's lethal weapon, Aizen never let his guard down, as he had preemptively casted Protective Kido at vulnerable points on his body just on the off chance that he was going to be betrayed. Now, this level of foresight and preparedness makes him almost invincible to surprise attacks. Aizen's strategic genius ensures that he is always several steps ahead of everyone else, including those whose power involve being a step ahead like Yhwach. His vast knowledge encompasses things almost no one else knows, and his knack for invention is comparable to Urahara's, as Aizen had even created his own Hokyoku. Gyetsu, as well as mod Arrancars which are capable of countering Yamamoto's Shikai. Aizen's knowledge is so extensive that it wouldn't surprise me if he was already aware of the issues that are surrounding Hell, which were first brought up during the No Breeds from Hell one-shot chapter. Aizen's Zanpakuto Kyokusui Getsu is infamously broken. Its power of absolute hypnosis allows Aizen to control all 5 senses of his victims, thus making it impossible for them to distinguish between illusion and reality. Thus, overcoming Kyokusui Getsu's effects is nearly impossible. The only ways to do so are by being blind, touching the blade before its release, or negating its power using spiritual pressure, a feat that is unattainable for 99.9% of characters due to the overwhelming Reiatsu that Aizen possesses. Aizen's Reiatsu is immense, and it forms the foundation of his power. His vast spiritual energy allows him to enhance basic Kido spells into devastating attacks. For instance, he can block high-level Kido like Hado number 88 with a simple chantless Danku. This immense Reiatsu makes him a formidable opponent in any battle. During the Can't Be Your Own World light novels, Tokinada had tried to utilize Aizen's Zanpakuto Kyokusui Getsu, but he wasn't able to utilize the full extent of its illusions because of his limited Reiatsu reserves. And Tokinada's limited version of Kyokusui Getsu was laughable in comparison to Aizen's version. Moreover, Aizen's immortality granted by the Hokyoku, which is embedded in his body, means that he will continually regenerate and he cannot be killed by any means that are known to the Soul Society. It's thanks to the immortality that he has which had led to him being imprisoned within Muken rather than being executed. In summary, Aizen possesses an unbeatable combination of intellect, immense Reiatsu, a broken Zanpakuto ability, along with immortality just to top it off. He has no real weaknesses and he has near unlimited power, as well as a tactical mind which outclasses almost everybody else. These qualities make Aizen the most powerful character to have ever been a captain within the history of the Soul Society. Well, now that it's been over an hour that I've been talking about the strength and weaknesses of the different Bleach captains, we've reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What are your own personal lists for the strongest captains in the story? I know that some of you are going to agree and disagree with me, as these ranking lists are some of the most controversial videos that I do make, but hopefully I've explained every single position on this list and why they deserve to be in that spot. So if you disagree with me, then definitely leave a comment and let me know your alternative reasoning and how you would rank the characters instead. Lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach Explained video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.